أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم
حي على الصلاة
لا حول ولا قوة إلا
حي
بالله
على الصلاة
لا حول ولا قوة
حي
إلا
على
بالله
الفلاح
لا إله
حي
إلا الله
على
إلا بالله
الفلاح
لا حول
الله أكبر الله أكبر
الله أكبر الله أكبر
لا إله إلا الله
لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم رضيت بالله ربا وبالإسلام دينا وبمحمد صلى الله عليه وسلم رسولا ونبيا اللهم رب هذه الدعوة التامة والصلاة القائمة آت محمدا الوسيلة والفضيلة وبعثه مقاما محمودا الذي وعدته إنك لا تخلف الميعاد بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي اللهم اجعلنا من الذين يستمعون القول فيتبعون أحسنه. Honorable and respected brothers and sisters, Jazakumullahu khairan once again for joining us on this Friday. Sadly, many of us, most of us, are unable to attend Salatul Jumu'ah in the masjid. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to bring us back to a condition and a situation where we are able to attend the Jumu'ah in the masjid. Ameen. And instead of that, inshallah, we should pray Salatul Dhuhr. If possible, we should try to pray that Salatul Dhuhr in congregation. That is the better way to do it. So, inshallah, in today's speech, I'm going to start off with a bit of an anecdote, a story, which I read about one of the scholars in the past. I'm not sure why the adhan is happening again. I think it's an error. So one of the scholars in our history, so what happened is he went to a place where there was a bit of a, he went to give a speech which certain people in that area, in the place where he was a guest, did not like that speech, right? These things happen. People, it conflicts with their interest, with their personal whims and their outlook in life. So he gave a speech, and certain ruffians and certain thugs from that region said, how dare he come to our area and talk about this? If he comes again, tell him to come prepared to die. Meaning he was a threat. So the sheikh in question was scheduled to speak again, and he was invited. So he came for the second time, and as he entered, people saw he had a bundle of something under his arms, under his armpit. So they said, Sheikh, what is this you got with you? I brought my coffin with me. They said, why did you bring your coffin? He said, because they said I should come prepared to die. So here's my coffin. If I die, here's my coffin. You can bury me in it. So apart from it being quite comical, it shows how there are many people who, how real life and death is for them, like how serious they are about the fact that they could die at any moment. I once met a brother in London. Okay, I met him in East London, And I was talking to the brother, and I noticed that the brother, he had like multiple layers on. So he was wearing a thobe, and he had a collar, and you could see that there were like multiple collars. He looked a bit odd. And during the conversation, the something, however, the conversation went round to, I didn't ask him, but somehow he came up and he said, "Look, I wear three thobes, three jubbas, because this is my coffin. I heard the scholars say that we should be ready to die at any time. So I wear three thobes, so that if I die now, then my coffin is with me, three thobes." Now, to be honest, that's not really a good strategy, because even if the brother was to die, they're not going to use his three thobes. They will get three pieces of cloth, or they will cut those thobes up maybe if he really wants to. So it's not the actual practice which I am commending here, but it's the mindset, it's the spirit. So this brother, and he was, mashallah, a very, very seemingly pious brother. Um, so this is how many people lived. This is how many people lived. It is said about Umar bin Abdul Aziz, rahmatullahi alayh, who was one of the most famous and amazing leaders in Islamic history. So when he passed away, he was traveling, and he had hardly any wealth or possessions. This is what I recall reading. It's a long time ago, but in any case, where he went, where he passed away, he had some money with him, and he said to his wife that if I pass away, this is what I have. Purchase. I want you to purchase a piece of land so I can be buried in that piece of land, because I don't want to be buried in somebody else's land. I don't want people to think, oh, the leader passed away, and they feel obliged and they feel pressured to give up their land so he can be buried in it. Even in his death, he did not want to cause anybody any inconvenience. So this is the outlook that our pious predecessors had, and not just predecessors before, but there are people in the world like that today. There are people in the world like that today. I've met people, who there are many people who are planning, constantly planning, for when they die. Okay, so dying is an inevitability of life. There is nothing more certain in life than the fact that we will leave this world, and the fact that we will die. Nothing is more certain than that. And when will that be? There is no certainty. I mean, there's no certainty that I will make it to the end of this speech. There is no certainty that we will make it till Asr's time. So we can die at any time. And what is befitting of a believer is that he or she is prepared for that. Now, there are many layers. To be honest, our whole life is and should be a preparation for our death, right? That is, what we're preparing for. Just imagine what people do or used to do before the pandemic with weddings. They would prepare. Some people would prepare and plan their weddings for years on end. Okay, some people for months, and many people at least for weeks and weeks. Why? For that one occasion, for that one afternoon, for that one evening, for that one event. So much planning. So our lives are in essence preparation for our deaths, because how we shall die will be our defining moment. When I say how we shall die, we can't define how we die. So don't get me wrong. It's not like, oh, I want to have the perfect death. I want to be surrounded by all my friends, my relatives, my children, my grandchildren. We don't have control over that. We could die in a plane crash where there's nobody, where our body could never be found. This is a reality, and there are people who die like that. So what I mean by planning for our deaths is planning the state, the spiritual, the social state that we are in when we leave this world. On what terms do we leave this world? On what terms do we leave this world? That is what we spend our whole lives as Muslims preparing for. Our lives are a preparation for our death. Now, death for a believer in reality is not the end of anything significant. Death for a believer is the beginning of great things. Death for a believer, for a true believer, is the beginning of many, many great things. First of all, they have, if they manage to leave this world with Iman in a good state, then they have passed the test. What will happen in the future to everybody else will be secondary now. They have passed the test and they have reached salvation and security and safety. And now they can start reaping the rewards for everything that they have done. All this saving, all these savings, just imagine somebody has like a special savings account where money is being built up, but they're not allowed to touch it until a certain age. And now they're starving, they're hungry, and they can't do anything. Or a person's, I mean, an easier example is the one that we learn from our tradition, is that ad-dunya sijnul mu'min, that the world is the prison of the believer. Okay, so it's like a person leaving prison, person leaving prison. So this is the reality of a believer when they leave this world, that they have been let out of the cage and now they are able to reap the benefits and eat the fruits of their hard work. Okay, like a person can be a millionaire, billionaire, but when they're in prison they are confined to the same walls as the person in the next cell, who might be a poor person, and so on and so forth, right? So that is death for a believer. But also, a believer, when they leave this world, if they have played their cards right, so to speak, if they have spent their time well strategically, if they have made the right investments, right, then they will have a pension beyond death as well, right? Pension, I use that example, why? Because in the modern day we have pensions, it's now mandatory, it's opt out from the government, meaning when you're working you have to put something aside for after you stop working. Okay, right, unless you opt out. So what is the idea of a pension? The idea of a pension is, now whilst you are fit and healthy and able to work, don't just enjoy it, put money aside, so that when you are no longer able to work or no longer want to work, then you can, you have, some support, you have something to fall back on, you have something to provide for you. I mean, look how smart the modern human being is, look how strategic and organized the modern human being is. But sadly, all of that, even that, is done for this world. I mean, we have come to a situation where it's become mandatory, or the default position, that everybody should have a pension, but we've forgotten the hereafter as as a race. Okay, how ironic the times are. It's not like we've completely just become, completely stupid and completely chaotic, but in reality, we've got all of our priorities wrong. So, likewise, a Muslim a believer who spends his time correctly, when they shut their eyes, then they haven't even stopped working. This is not the end of it. This is not there. Now they will enjoy their pension. They will enjoy their pension. And what do we mean by pension? That's what I was going to talk about. The pension of a believer, whilst he or she is in his or her grave, is what they will. Sorry, I'm just. So the pension of a believer is that when they leave this world, the investments they had made will now start to bring fruits for them. The Prophet ﷺ told us that when a person goes to their grave, their family, their wealth, and things go with them. But then once they are buried, it all turns back, and only their good deeds stay with them. The Prophet ﷺ also told us that there are some exceptions, so to speak, to this, meaning that once a person, whatever good deeds they've done, yes, they will go with them. But a person can also acquire good deeds after they leave this world. And he said that there are three, right? إذا مات الإنسان انقطع عنه عمله إلا من ثلاث أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام, that when a person dies, then their actions, their good deeds are cut off. They can no longer do good deeds except for three things. They have three pension pots. Number one, right, is and I can't remember the exact order, but one of them is وَلَدٌ صَالِحٌ يَدْعُو لَهُ, pious offspring who pray for the person. Pious offspring who pray for the person. عِلْمٌ يُنْتَفَعُ بِهِ, knowledge which is benefited from, and صَدَقَةٌ جَارِيَةٌ, sadaqah, charity which continues. All charity is good. All charity. So let's go through these with a little bit more detail. I'm sure most of us know this anyway. All charity is good. Charity, if somebody is hungry and they need food and you give them a meal to eat, they eat that meal, they are nourished, they have energy, and then they digest it and it's gone. That's not necessarily sadaqah jariyah, right? But it's very important sadaqah. But some sadaqat, some charity, some forms of charity, they continue because people continue to benefit from that, right? So the Prophet ﷺ, he even said that the best form of charity for the deceased is water. So for example, what does water mean? To dig a well. When you dig a well, then countless people, I mean, nobody, no human being can count how many people benefited from a well. So that is sadaqah jariyah, right? That's the easiest one in many ways, meaning that is in some ways it's the easy one. Why? Because in the modern world, alhamdulillah, it's not that difficult. If we have money, then you can just kind of get it done. So that's good. We should do that. We should do that for our loved ones who have passed away as well. The other two are more universal, because if you don't have money, it's hard to do sadaqah jariyah sometimes. The other two are more universal, but in some ways are harder and they require more work. But in some ways, perhaps they are even more like foundational and important. One is waladun salihun yad'u lahu, to have pious children who pray for the person. And we might think all children pray for their parents. Well, maybe in our experience and maybe in our worldview, but not necessarily. How many people are there in the world whose children hear of their parents passing, and for them it's just like the cat next door passed away. We had a guest on from a funeral service a couple of weeks ago, and he was telling us of his experience of how some people are passing away and their children are calling the funeral service and saying, look, my mother passed away, can you deal with it, send us a bill at the end. Okay. There are stories I've heard before of people traveling distances to come and attend the funeral of their parents, but when they arrive, people realize that all they want is to lay claim to, or to acquire a certain thing that the parents had that they wanted in inheritance. So let us not take that for granted. Will our children even care after we leave this world for them? Number one. Number two, will they know what to do? Because sometimes our children care. So it's not just about having a loving family. It's not just about having a loving family, and we ask Allah to grant us all that. But it's also about knowing. It's also about knowing. Because you can have the most close-knit family who love each other, who are there for each other. But when a person passes away, then the children have no idea what they should do, what they can do, what they should do, other than grieve. Okay. And grieving, that is an important part of passing away, but it doesn't necessarily benefit us. I mean, they can cry for a year on end, but what's more beneficial to us is them making dua for us, them giving sadaqah on our behalf, them doing good deeds that will benefit us. So our children need to also know how they are going to benefit us, how they are going to benefit us. Otherwise, and those of us who are from maybe a slightly older generation, we might take these things for granted, but we shouldn't. Why? Because things are moving in a very different direction to how they were before. You know, I remember when I was growing up, when somebody would pass away, if you would go to the house of the deceased to, you know, pay your respects, to give your condolences, generally there would be a somber mood of, you know, of contemplation. People would be making dua, people would be doing dhikr, people would be reciting the Quran, people would generally be doing good things. It is now very common to go to the house of a deceased person and find that, I mean, at the very least, the least of the problems is that there'll be a group of people sitting in a room, each one of them on their phone, doing whatever, reading news, messaging people on WhatsApp, reading Facebook posts. I mean, that's sad enough as it is. But then sometimes we go one step further and people are talking about completely random, irrelevant things that are, to be honest, sometimes quite disrespectful to the situation. Sometimes that can even lead to inappropriate talk, backbiting. And then sometimes now we find that the television is on and it's keeping the whole crowd entertained. So, yes, it's very nice that so many people have come to express their condolences, to be with the family. But what can you do to actually be of benefit in the situation? This is something that requires not just goodwill, not just a caring heart, not just a good relationship. It requires some training and a certain outlook to life, right? A certain and knowledge as well, knowledge about what you need to do. So the second one is عمل ولد صالح يدعو له, pious children, or anybody who you know, your family, your loved ones, who will continue to pray for you. And the third one was أو علم ينتفع به, knowledge which will be benefited from. Now, this is the one I think in sometimes it's a bit tricky. Like, what do you mean by knowledge that will be benefited from? Is that only applying to, like, you know, like the great ulama, like you know, Imam Bukhari, Imam Malik, Imam Abu Hanifa, rahmatullahi alayhim? No, this is a general thing, and it can apply to anybody. It can apply to anybody. So examples of that are teachers. What do teachers do? This is a formal example. A teacher teaches his or her students, and that benefit, I mean, that knowledge which they impart benefits those students for, you know, often till the end of their lives. And often those students pass on that knowledge to their students, and it benefits their students. So, teaching, being involved in teaching, whether it is teaching yourself, like doing the teaching yourself, or supporting the cause of education. So, once upon a time, and again, these things are becoming less and less in the materialistic world we are living in now, in the individualistic world. I feel that these things are becoming less and less common. Where before people would, for example, they would get, you know, Qurans printed, or they would get books of knowledge printed, right? And they would distribute them to tulabu ilm, to students of knowledge, for example. Or they would pay for the books of a poor student so that he or she can study. Why? Because that is now a form of knowledge which will bring benefit. Okay, but it's not even limited to that, because once upon a time, the elders of the community used to teach good manners, used to teach good conduct to the youngsters in the community. You know, mashallah, we have an uncle in the masjid whose company I really enjoy. And very often when I meet him, he would tell me about the manners that his grandfather taught him, the manners that his grandfather would had taught him. So he would talk about, yeah, and this is he would just tell me about the manners his grandfather taught him, about his grandfather taught him, you know, so and so, this is how you should be. You should not be like this. And he says, I live by that until today, right? And he said the world has changed so much. So this was just his grandfather teaching him. And if you know, you can probably think now, oh yeah, we've read stories like this about uncles and grandfathers and people teaching people. So this was a good world where, I mean, where people could do that, where you could pass on knowledge even if you are not a teacher, right? So passing on good manners. Don't get me wrong. When I say passing on good knowledge, I don't mean sharing things on WhatsApp. I don't mean forwarding fatawa. I don't mean going to the masjid and telling somebody, brother, akhi, this is haram. I read it on Google and then I watched it on YouTube. No. What I mean is the passing on of good manners, right? The passing on of good manners. This is the easy way. Why do I say that? Because you know the other one, it's not really passing on knowledge. To be honest, forwarding things on WhatsApp, we need to realize as a generation that this is not passing on knowledge. It's most of the time it's increasing confusion. Most of the time it's creating controversy. Most of the time it is belittling knowledge because a person is getting 500 different forwards and doesn't have much value for them. So please remember that forwarding things on WhatsApp is not necessarily or rarely is actually knowledge that can be benefited from. Okay, so these are the things that the Prophet ﷺ said can benefit a person. These are our pension pots for when we leave this world. So what I remind myself first and foremost, and everybody else to do is to think about this, to do this planning. I'm sure if we are of working age, then we probably have a pension. We might not even know about it because, like I said, it's the government made it mandatory a few years ago. So we probably have a pension for this world. But what about our pension for the hereafter? Because we might leave tomorrow. We don't know if we will live long enough to benefit from the pension that we have signed up to or we have been signed up for. But will we leave this world? Definitely. And have we, in our three pension pots, people who will make dua for us and worry about our hereafter after this world? Are there people like that in this world, from our family, from our close loved ones? And do they know even what they need to do to express that love? Number two, knowledge. Have we put anything in that pot? Have we taught anybody anything good? Have we made anybody a better person? Okay, not have we forwarded WhatsApp links to people and have we given out fatawa and told people how they're given fatawa to people. That is the job. I mean, for that you need a qualification to do that, to be honest. Okay, but have you been part of the passing of true knowledge? And number three is sadaqah jariyah, charity which continues. Have you participated, or how many wells have you helped dig? How many shelters have you helped erect for homeless people, and so on and so forth? If we so just how with our worldly pensions we continue, we don't just give £5 from the first salary we get and then say that's it. We always give. We want our pension pot to grow. So likewise the same thing, these pots we want to put all the time, be putting things into them, always be putting things so they grow, right? Because the more we have the better. I ask Allah Azza wa Jal to grant me the tawfiq to do this and grant all of us the tawfiq. Ameen. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen.